he did.
I think it's safe to say Indiana Jones hasn't overly had a good run post the 1989 release of The Last Crusade. Kingdom of the Crystal Skull was a bit of a mess, but I will say its opening premise of being set in the Soviet era was kinda cool, but its use of CGI rather than physical locations didn't really do it any justice, as well as Shia LaBeouf. But the Dial of Destiny was somehow worse than the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
This guy, this is not my kind of guy.
So, if like me you were cautious when Bethesda and Machine Games announced that they were working on an Indiana Jones game, I totally understand. However, The Great Circle isn't only a brilliant video game, but it's also a fantastic Indiana Jones story. But well, why? The attention to detail, the writing of the characters, the mocap, the voice acting, hell, the gameplay, all of these are reasons why you should check it out, but let me break it down a bit more for you perhaps, because, well, I think more people need to check out Indiana Jones and The Great Circle.
There you are, my friend.
Set between Raiders of the Lost Ark and The Last Crusade, Indiana Jones and The Great Circle is set in 1937, so during Indiana Jones's prime years.
You call me Dr. Jones, dog!
And after waking up in the middle of the night at Marshall College, Dr. Jones finds that someone has broken into the college, that person being Candyman himself, Tony Todd, who beats the crap out of Dr. Jones and steals an artifact at the college's exhibits. And while something being stolen from Indiana's college no less doesn't overly sit right with him, and with some evidence as to where Candyman came from, Indiana leaves Marshall College to follow the trail around the world as to why someone broke into his college and stole a cat mummy.
A what?
From this, Indiana travels to the Vatican, Egypt, the Himalayan mountains, Thailand, and more throughout the events of the story.
You know how to fly, don't you?
No. Do you?
So the premise of the story of The Great Circle is pretty interesting, because if we look at the main three movies in the trilogy, Indiana sort of falls into or gets persuaded to take those quests. With Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indiana gets approached by military intelligence and hired to do a job. In Temple of Doom, he finds himself helping out villagers to retrieve a stone after having to bail out of a plane crash from a previous adventure, and The Last Crusade is about finding his missing father. So the story of someone breaking into his college to steal something, I think personally, is a creative opening premise for a story. But, well, there's also more than just a stolen cat mummy from a college at play here, with multiple artifacts and a story linking to the mystery known as The Great Circle. Now, while the story is overall pretty damn good, the Great Circle's characters, including Indiana himself, complement the story too. The main villain, Emmerich Voss, is a Nazi archaeologist who works pretty damn well, sort of acting like an evil version of Indiana. And while, no, he doesn't wear a black version of Indy's outfit, he has the intellectual mind to match Indiana. A little bit like, say, Belloc from Raiders of the Lost Ark, but sort of Voss is more crafty and less charming. And the voice actor and character model for his character as well works pretty damn well. We've got a Nazi military commander in Gantz, but who first sort of comes off and seems like a generic military leader, but then we get some interesting character development and changes with Gantz and Voss, before later in the game he sort of becomes a little bit comical.
You laugh and dance, celebrating your own idiocy and drinking the piss you call beer!
But his character is delivered as a commander who is technically in charge and has military command over Voss, but ends up becoming his puppet in a way, and it's a pretty fun turn of events, and more so a bit more big dick brain moves from Voss in this game as well. But we've also got smaller villains, if you will, with Father Ventura, who during the earlier stages of the game set in the Vatican, works with Voss and Mussolini, and Voss has this cool Bond-like side villain, if you will, but I'll get back to him in a little minute. On the supporting character side though, we've got an investigative journalist, Gina, who is looking for her missing sister, who is also linked to the artifacts that relate to the Great Circle, and act as this game's version of Indiana's love interest, as well as sort of partner in crime for the story, if you will, a little bit like, say, Marion. However, Gina also works in gameplay moments as well, as she can pull levers and switches when there are two people required, and she will give you a heads up if there are Nazis around or looking at your direction, and her character doesn't feel forced or out of place at all. Throughout the entire time in the story, nothing Gina said or didn't work with what was going on in that situation. Now, each city too that you explore, from the Vatican, the Pyramids of Giza, the jungles of Thailand, have supporting characters who assist Indiana through the story. For example, you have Father Antonio in the Vatican, and he'll give you some sort of information, some guides, and help you around at the start of the game. And each sort of sandbox area, if you will, has a character who provides these different forms of assistances.
Pretty standard, really.
And of course, we've got Marcus Brody in the game, who makes a small appearance at the start, and, well, it is Marcus Brody. He is a support character. He gives us a little bit of some background information in regards to what happened with Indiana and Marion. That's kind of all we really need as well.
She was at her wit's end with you. I didn't know what to say.
It wouldn't have made a difference. She had her mind made up.
But the standout character is Tony Todd's character, and I'm not going to go into any spoilers for his character or his arc and such, but his character is pretty damn cool and has a great screen presence as well, and this may be Tony Todd's last role before he passed away, and I think it's pretty special, and it's quite beautiful too as well when the story wrapped up, and his character really grows as you sort of progress in the story of the Great Circle. Finally though, you've got Troy Baker as Indiana Jones, and graphically, the game is visually stunning. It looks like Indiana Jones, but also what's really impressive is Troy Baker isn't just doing a Indiana Jones impression, but I found he was more so doing Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones, if that makes sense.
Hey, lady, you call him Dr. Jones.
My professional name.
His voice, the mocap mannerisms, all kind of feels like you are watching Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones, rather than just a character with sort of a Indiana Jones skin over the top. And I think Troy Baker does a pretty damn good job being Harrison Ford, who is then being Indiana Jones.
Gina.
Now, before I get into the gameplay, I just want to give some quick stats. I played this on PC running a 4080 graphics card, running this on ultra graphics settings, and generally clocking in around 80 frames a second or so as my average. And I used mouse and keyboard only. I didn't use a controller, so I'm sorry if any of you have any controller questions. I might not be able to answer that for you. But looking over at the gameplay, the overall gameplay of the Great Circle is a mixture of a few games really. Now, there is a disguise system similar to that of, say, Hitman, where only captains of the military, if you will, can see through your disguises. There's open world sandboxes like, say, Dishonored, Deathloop, or Redfall, if you will, and yes, there are guns, but ammo is pretty limited, and using loud weapons is sometimes more of a hindrance rather than an easy way out. But overall, gameplay of Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, dude, it's a near fucking perfect game for one simple reason. You are playing as Indiana Jones, and that's what the gameplay is. It's not trying to be an action game where you sometimes look or sometimes act like Indiana Jones. You are doing everything as if you are actually him. And what I mean by that is, you are not a bulletproof hero with 10 different weapons to swap out. You've got a leather jacket, a pistol, and a whip as your sort of permanent weapons. And if it wasn't obvious, bullets go through leather jackets pretty damn easy.
No shit.
But Indiana Jones and the Great Circle isn't a shooter as well, but it's a simulated adventure title where you need to act and think like Indiana Jones. Now, if you've seen the films or you're a fan of the series, well, the original 3 movies, because I don't think I actually know anyone who likes Indiana Jones 4 or 5, but Indiana Jones is a bit of a scrapper as well when it comes to combat. He knows how to throw a punch, yes, but he also knows how to get the shit kicked out of him, a little bit like, say, John McClane. And melee combat is pretty straightforward with a simple attack, block, counter, which is done by sort of hitting the block button just before you get hit. You can dodge as well, and then heavy attacks are used by just holding down the punch button. You can also grab enemies and punch them, but the overall sort of close range combat is pretty simple to understand, but it can be a little difficult to master, or at least I found it hard to master in sometimes. But I will say the combat is, I wouldn't say similar, but what sort of keyed it in with me is a small bit of Ghost of Tsushima, where if you look at the combat in that game, if you go and just swing a sword, you're going to get tired and open yourself up to being sort of getting the shit kicked out of you. And it's the same thing here with the Great Circle. Yes, you can rush into combat and start swinging your fist, but you'll get maybe a hit or two in, but against larger brute enemies, they'll take the damage, you'll get tired, and they'll swing back at you, and you need stamina to block, because, well, that's just sort of how the combat works in this game. But Indiana can sort of help himself in close range combat by picking up and using nearly any item in his environment, from hammers, crowbars, brooms, bottles, loofahs, and even frying pans, and depending on what weapon you're using, depends on, say, how tough it is.
Tougher than you look.
For example, a glass bottle won't overly be very tough, and it will deal more damage than your fists. Something like a sledgehammer though can be used 5 to 6 times before it breaks, and each melee weapon has a durability gauge, if you will, at the bottom of the screen to give you an idea of how many times you can use this before it breaks. Now, if you've got something like, say, a glass bottle, and you sneak up behind an enemy, because there is a bit of a stealth element in this game, you can immediately knock them out quickly. The glass bottle just smashes over their head, they're knocked out, you can pick up their bodies and hide them so they don't get seen. It's got that little bit of that Hitman stealth mechanics of take someone out when no one's looking, hide the body, but you don't get to pull uniforms directly from a knocked out person. You need to actually find the uniforms yourself. You can't take people's clothes. But it's also worth noting, guns don't take a back seat in the Great Circle. Shooting, yes, is a quick way to take down an enemy, and I couldn't help myself by shooting some enemies like the swordsman scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark, but Indiana can only hold a small amount of bullets for his pistol, and you can pick up weapons from enemies like, say, shotguns, rifles, their submachine guns, or an officer's pistol. But the gunplay is pretty simple and straightforward. You aim with one button, you shoot with another. But you can't fire Indiana's pistol or weapons in the game without aiming first, because if you hit the fire button while you have Indiana's pistol out, for example, well, Indiana's going to open up his pistol and start reloading. And I did find it a little weird when you are, say, shooting with a rifle especially, that you're not aiming down iron sights. It's more of a bit of a zoomed in style perspective, and it sort of felt a bit weird, but going back and watching the Indiana Jones films, while I'm on a high playing this game, you also realize that Indiana isn't really a good shot in the movies. Like, he just randomly fires his gun. He's not really lining up a shot to take people out. But when you do run out of ammo in this game, and sometimes in some instances you will, you don't just need to sort of drop a gun. So if you pick up a rifle from a sort of a Nazi guard, you don't just need to drop it when it's done. But Indiana can actually use a gun like a melee weapon, flipping it around and using it like a club, which I actually think is brilliant. And throughout the story, you'll have cinematic, interactive set pieces where, for example, you'll be on a boat chase, there'll be a couple of rifles in front of you, so there are some shooting aspects to the game, but they're more so weaved into your big action set pieces. For your main BAU day-to-day gameplay, if you will, you might not be running around with a machine gun shooting everyone, because you'll get every other Nazi's attention or every other fascist's attention in the game. You can't actually pick up ammo for enemy weapons, you basically just use what's in the clip and then, the gun's empty. So using a gun is sort of a last resort, as well as if you're cornered and you have to, it's maybe a way to survive. But the great thing about the combat, though, is the sound design. Because all the punches, and then every time you use a weapon against an enemy and all that sort of stuff like that, you get that iconic 80s sound. Sort of like a spun towel being slapped on a raw ass. It's that iconic sound that Indiana's whip will make when it's in combat as well. And the whip can actually be used to disarm enemies or pull enemies in closer towards you, and the sound of gunfire and cracking whips as well can also scare off dogs, which is this cool little mechanic that, strangely enough, the game doesn't teach you some of its combat mechanics or some of its sort of setups. You have to go into the menu and read the game manual from the main menus. It would be kind of cool if there was the prologue for the start of the game taught you that, yeah, dogs will run at the sound of a cracked whip or from a gunshot. But now, going back just a second to my remark about being a simulated adventure title, and what I mean by that is the gameplay is very similar to that of Alien Isolation. You have to input buttons to open doors, to equip a key, and to put the key in the lock and unlock the door. You need to pull boards up from the floor, and anytime you need to do something, you need to press the relevant buttons, a little similar to how you would in Alien Isolation, when you would need to break open doors and use the multi-tool, or use the blowtorch to get through sort of those breakable panels. And the same thing too when equipping and changing your disguises. You'll need to open up Indiana's bag and swap out the outfit yourself, and you get this cool little animation of him putting his hat on or putting on a different jacket, and when you look down, you see Indiana's hands, you see his legs, and it all sort of moves around. It feels like an immersive sim. The HUD also has no map on the screen. Anytime you want to know where you're going, you need to pull out Indiana's journal and actually go to a map section, and you physically walk around with the map in your hand as you're sort of actually walking around the world. But also, doing any actions in this game as well, or most actions, will tire Indiana. So if you're using your whip to, say, climb a wall, or you're scaling a pipe, or tree branches, that will tire Indiana out. Throwing punches, blocking attacks will tire him out too, as well as using your whip in combat, or swinging a flamed torch to keep scorpions at bay will puff him out. Outside of the combat aspect to it and the general gameplay, Indiana has multiple tools and consumables that he can use. Now, bandages restore your health, eating bread will give you temporary health buffs, and eating fruit will give you temporary stamina buffs, as well as a camera that can be used to take photos of landmarks, puzzles, clues, or even just taking photos of Indiana's adventures, which I will get back to in a minute. But when you go to different locations like Egypt and Thailand, you get items like, say, a lighter, so you can explore a tomb when you need a light source, or a rebreather that will allow Indiana to stay underwater longer when exploring, say, a flooded crypt. And there is a skill system in the Great Circle, and it's all done by finding books out in the world that will teach Indiana new abilities, and I fucking love this. The idea of Indiana learning a new ability or skill from reading a book and learning it that way, I think is pretty damn cool, and that works for the character of Indiana. You see what I mean? It's all sort of that simulation experience, and it works as a natural way for us, the players, to get new abilities or upgrades. But you'll have your standard deal more damage in combat, or melee weapons can last longer before they break, and the personal favourite for most people out there is Lucky Hat, where Indiana will go into a down but not out situation, and you can sort of army crawl over, if you will, towards your hat, pick it up, put it back on, dust it off, and it gives you sort of a second chance to try something again. Like, if you get knocked out by a guard, they're nearly dead, you can crawl over to your hat and last chance, put the hat back on, the guard will sort of think you're dead, he'll walk off, then you can just hit him on the head with a glass bottle. Like, that kind of thing. Now, on top of that too, there are 2 currencies in this game, and don't worry, none of them are microtransactions. You've got standard money, which is used to buy items from vendors, which will have, say, key items like the lighter that you need to buy to explore tombs, but they'll also have maps that will help you find, say, skill books or artifacts for some of these side collectibles. But you'll also have adventure points, which are used for unlocking skills in your books. Now, you'll find a book out in the world, and then you spend your adventure points to basically read that book and learn the ability. And the cool thing is too, you're not forced to spend your adventure points immediately or leave the book behind. Sort of like if you don't have the points to, say, get that skill, then you just don't leave the book behind and then forces you to come back to it. Indiana will put that book in his bag, and then you can look at it later when you have those points to get that upgrade, if that makes sense.
Oh, there is just one more thing.
Finally, you'll be able to find medicine in each area or world or sandbox, if you will, and by going to nurses' stations or hospitals, you'll be able to sort of trade this medicine in for books, and these books will give you permanent upgrades to your health and stamina. By far, though, the greatest thing, at least in my opinion, are the puzzles. Whether it's platforming puzzles where you're running from a flood, or a room is encased in fire and you need to act quickly, or just simple brain teasers. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle has puzzles and challenges, one of which took me over 30 minutes to figure it out.
God, give me the answer!
I felt kind of smart when I got it, but then I also went, you're a moron for not getting this sooner. But the puzzles and tombs can be done in sort of 2 separate ways. You have an easy mode where the game will assist players, or you've got the standard mode where you need to open up Indiana's journal and review your notes and the clues that you've got. And in some instances, you'll be going back and forth between sort of trying to solve the puzzle and going through your notes in your journal. But the atmosphere of exploring a empty crypt that is covered in spiderwebs and light piercing through the roof above really does stand out, because there's a decent variety of tombs and crypts and catacombs to explore, both in the main story and in optional side missions too. Now, I feel like the crypts and tombs and puzzles, you kind of really need to nail that for an Indiana Jones game, and this game knocks it out of the park. I loved exploring tombs, lighting torches and holding them up so I can see my environments. Grabbing a sledgehammer and breaking open a wall really felt entertaining and also authentic. You just feel like Indiana Jones, but also what I wasn't expecting from its puzzle and tomb atmosphere, and just from the main story and elements, if you will, but there are a couple of moments of horror in this game in regard to, I won't spoil anything, but there are moments where I was sitting there going, I'm freaking the fuck out in this tomb, or you're in Thailand, there is an event that takes place there, and I'm sitting there going, I'm scared out of my fucking mind, but I have to do this kind of thing, and I kind of wasn't expecting that, and it was quite refreshing. However, on the negative front, to be fair, there isn't overly much to complain with the story, characters, or gameplay. I did find a few issues here and there while trying to distract a dog by throwing a glass bottle, but somehow the bottle shattered on a box in front of me, so then I decided to sprint past the enemies and the dog to hide under a house. And I was kind of surprised that the dog and the guards didn't immediately see me because basically I ran straight past them all, or just have the dog follow me under the house and attack. It was a bit weird. But also the AI for enemies on that note as well, and the companion character of Gina are a little bit hit and miss.
I need some light up here. Oh!
Now, I was stuck doing a puzzle for 30 minutes, I was racking my brain, I was calling myself an idiot, and Gina was just walking around the room and walking in front of me while I was holding clues in my hand, and it was just pissing me off. I also got caught by some Nazis and I ran inside of a train cart to sort of get some cover and sort of try to figure out what I could do to get away from them, and then I realized I could just sit here and watch them climb inside the train cart and just shoot them, and then when I run out of ammo, pick up their guns because they're carrying guns and just rinse and repeat, and that's what I did.
Look what you did! Can't believe what you did!
Now finally, the last boss fight. Now if you want to skip this part to avoid any kind of spoilers, please go to the time screen that I'm putting up on screen now, but having said that, I don't think it's a spoiler, but it's up to you guys. But the last boss fight is against Voss, and it kind of felt out of place. Now, I did chat with some of my other mates who have played and finished the Great Circle, and they didn't agree with me on this opinion, and that's completely fine, but the last boss fight with Voss kind of felt off. Because earlier in the game, Voss seems a little slapsticky during some confrontations where he's fumbling around on the floor trying to get a gun, and his character presence is sort of, I'm incredibly smart, but I will get others to do the heavy lifting for me. And at the end of the game, you're having a fist fight against him, and he can properly fuck you up, and it took me a couple of attempts, and it's because Voss boasts that he knows karate.
Fair warning. I have mastered the lethal Japanese hand-to-hand combat art of karate.
Karate is not here. It's here, and here, and here.
And maybe 20, 30 minutes before that, we're shown Voss's personal assistant driver, who is a mute character. Now, they've been in the game prior to this point before, but they've never really been a central point or character on the screen. However, I thought the game hadn't rendered the character properly because his face looked oddly smooth, until I realised that he's wearing a face mask covering up a portion of his face, somewhat hiding, say, burns or scars or something, and I don't know why, but I got super interested on that for some reason. And it had me think that, well, Voss could have been the brains, but Bergman, his driver and assistant that wears this mask, at the end of the game, could have been sort of the muscle for Voss. Sort of like a Bond villain, a little bit like how, say, Oddjob is for Goldfinger. And personally, I think that could have been kind of cool. And one of the main reasons why I think that would have worked is just how Voss does a bit of a random 180, where he's kind of just bumbling around in action and combat moments, then to know karate and kick the shit out of Indiana. It felt kind of off, where the scarred, masked and muted assassin, or, you know, a sidekick character if you will, for Voss could have been the cool physical aspect, where Voss is the brains. But Indiana Jones and the Great Circle is not only a brilliant game, but it might be one of the greatest video games based on a film IP. And again, I'll make reference to it, but Indiana Jones and the Great Circle is, well, the Indiana Jones version of Alien Isolation. Now, Alien Isolation submerged you into the fear and simulated experience of living and experiencing a story in the Alien universe, and Indiana Jones and the Great Circle does the exact same thing, but have us play as Indiana. I had very little issues with this game, as the negatives were just sort of my personal thoughts, but to be fair, all my reviews on this channel are personal thoughts. But I had a giant shit-eating grin on my face when I first booted up the game to live the Raiders of the Lost Ark intro with the fertility idol, and the moments of gameplay and attention to detail was beautiful. Then to introduce us a new story, a new adventure, and brilliant acting from everyone on board. Honestly, I want Machine Games and Bethesda to do Indiana Jones games basically exclusively, and to give us a trilogy of these games, because I think Indiana's time on the big screen is over, but he can continue to live on in video games just like this, and it would be brilliant.
You have any idea how old that was?
I'd love to see what Indiana's adventure was maybe a year after the events of The Last Crusade, or what his adventure was with Lao Che before the events of Temple of Doom.
Goodbye, Dr. Jones.
Now, I know I just did a Game of the Year video, which a fair few people didn't understand that it was a personal list, or why games that I haven't played or reviewed aren't on the list. But, if this game released earlier in the year, or if I did my Game of the Year video later in the month, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle would absolutely be my Game of the Year for certain. But whether you think Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade should have been the last Indiana Jones movie, or you're thinking if Indiana's actions actually made an impact throughout the events and story of Raiders of the Lost Ark, always remember to play with each other and play with yourself.
Can't still talk this out like...